about theocrats in my country. My country, in case you were curious, is the United States of America. And I've been thinking about it because our pal Rick Santorum, who is currently running for the presidency of the United States, said he thinks that civil law and God's law ought to coincide with each other. And probably the most disturbing thing about that is the complete lack of reaction from anyone. I'll mention it, or it'll come up in conversation somehow, and people will say, well, what's wrong with that? Or they'll just shrug. Or some of them will even say, well, we should do that. And surprisingly, my first reaction is not to pull out the Constitution, though I always get around to it sometime. And it's not even to protect my rights as a dirty heathen. It's actually to protect the majority of my friends, and indeed the majority of the people in the country who are some kind of theist. It will come as no surprise to you that Christianity is the norm for my country. Most of the people in the United States are Christians. What you might not have realized or might not have thought about is the fact that all denominations of Christianity are a minority. We don't have any kind of majority of any sect of Christianity in this country. You can't say, well, most people are evangelicals, because that isn't true. You can't say most people are Catholic or Mormon or Jehovah's Witness or Seventh-day Adventists or Lutherans, or really the list goes on and on. There are as many types of Christian as there are Christians, which makes it kind of puzzling to me that any of these people would accept a theocratic stance. How can you impose God's law when you can't even agree what God's law is? Let me give you a few examples. Let's start with a very small minority indeed, the Jehovah's Witnesses. They are Christians. We're not going to get into this. They're followers of Christ. They espouse themselves as Christians. They're Christians. And they have an interesting stance on blood transfusions. They've got biblical basis for saying that people should not partake in blood, and they translate this to mean in any way. They certainly, you shouldn't drink blood, but also you should not accept blood transfusions. So theoretically, and this has happened a number of times, if a Jehovah's Witness gets lethally bled in such a way that they make it to the hospital and they could be saved by a blood transfusion, they're not supposed to be. It's an edict of their faith. So if we imposed the Jehovah's Witness idea of God's law on the country, well, blood transfusions would become illegal, wouldn't they? And many, many people would die who didn't have to. Now, as I said, the Jehovah's Witnesses are a very small minority, so they're not likely to gain power. Even more interesting, another edict of their faith is non-participation in government. They aren't supposed to vote, they aren't supposed to enlist in the military, they're not supposed to run for public office. Now, do some of them do these things? Probably, but as an edict of their faith, they aren't supposed to. Alright, so Jehovah's Witnesses are out. Let's go with another religious sect. Our frontrunner in the Republican primary, Mitt Romney, is a Mormon, isn't he? Well, up until I believe, the 70s, if you were all chocolatey and delightful like your good friend Marshmallow 3455, you wouldn't be allowed to be admitted into the Mormon church because you are cursed. And your curse is made apparent by your delicious and chocolatey skin. So anyone darker than I am would kind of be left out in the dark, so to speak, right? Also, they've got that whole magical underwear, and it is more accurate to say that it's fortifying underwear or protective underwear, but really, it's kind of silly, guys. And, I mean, they even make this stuff for the military. Now, theoretically, it wouldn't work because you have to dye it to the proper color for your military uniform, and your magical underwear isn't supposed to be dyed. But don't let that bother you. Don't expect sense out of religion. So let's skip over the Mormons and go to the Catholics. Our friend Rick Santorum is a Catholic, and interestingly enough, so is most of my family. The Catholics have a serious problem with condoms. According to the Catholic Church, condoms are worse than chlamydia. Condoms are worse than unwanted pregnancies. Condoms are worse than AIDS. You can tell because they will go to Africa and spread the good word that, well, you know what? Condoms actually help spread AIDS. This is a true story. So the only official and sanctioned method of preventing pregnancy, according to the Catholic Church, is the rhythm method. This will explain to you why my mother has 6 children, or why my grandmother had 8 children. So obviously that rhythm method is really working out, isn't it? Not really. And maybe now you're thinking, well, that's the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons and the Catholics. That's not... You have to look at the Bible. We'll go to the Bible. Okay, let's go to the Bible. So, if we're going to base our laws on the edicts of the Bible, well, if anybody out there who has unruly children, you should take them out and stone them. If you're a lady who gets raped by a man and you decide, well, I don't actually want to marry my rapist, yeah, you should be stoned too. If you're homosexual, you should be stoned. If you work on the Sabbath, you should be stoned. Hey, remember that whole Civil War thing that we did back in the 1860s, and how we decided that, no, we really should not sanction slavery? Yeah, let's forget about all of that stuff, because you know what? It's perfectly acceptable in the Bible. In fact, it's laid down exactly how and why and under what circumstances you can own another person. Nice, right? Uh, you shouldn't rotate your crops. Farmers, you shouldn't plant multiple crops in the same field. For those of you hobbyists who have a home garden, you shouldn't eat shrimp or lobster. Darn it, Red Lobster is gonna go out of business. And really the list goes on, and it's all sorts of really crazy stuff in there. And now I know some of you at least are thinking, well, you're not reading the Bible right. You're misinterpreting texts. And I find that people say that not just to dirty, filthy heathens like me, but about everyone. Oh, well, Jehovah's Witnesses, they're not reading the Bible right. Oh, those crazy Seventh-day Adventists, they're not reading the Bible right. Nobody seems to be reading the Bible right, do they? Well, if no one is reading the Bible right, how are we to know what God's law is? And if we don't know what God's law is, how are we to impose it on the masses? The answer is we aren't supposed to impose it on the masses. And here I will reach for my Constitution. The First Amendment says, the first words of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It's important to note that the Constitution wasn't ratified by a single state until those words were added, and until the various other amendments, the other 9 amendments, were added to the Bill of Rights. It's important to remember that. And if you're not going to protect my rights as a dirty, filthy heathen to not believe in your invisible friend, that's fine. You don't have to. But how about you protect your own rights to believe in your invisible friend in any way you want to?